All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome, Seeker, to the gray mist of the soul's borderlands. Step carefully, for you are entering a space where the heavy debris of failure and the shadows of disharmonious desires gather. I am the Pale Inquisitor, and this is my domain. Pretty intense, right? That is the brooding, first-person perspective of the Pale Inquisitor, who is the central figure we're looking at in today's explainer. We're going to be tracing this incredibly fascinating mythological journey, watching this entity transform from a rigid, cold enforcer of absolute emptiness into this twisted cultivator of chaotic, overgrown guilt. It's really a deep dive into the architecture of the human mind. So let's get started.
To really understand this journey, we kind of have to start with a confession. The Inquisitor literally calls himself the Ghost of Law and a martyr for a law that saves no one. Before his whole transformation, he just drifted endlessly above this bottomless abyss at a place called the Iron Bridge. And picture this, he's draped in these massive robes made entirely of iron filings. But they weren't just decorative, they pulsed with this intense magnetic hunger, literally attracting the heavy, jagged debris of human guilt. He was essentially a spiritual vacuum, just hovering over the void, absorbing the heavy weight of every unspoken sin and failed ancestor.
Section 1. The Ghost of Law and a Spiritual Vacuum.
So, the texts tell us that the Inquisitor was basically acting as an anti-Galahad, completely obsessed with absolute stasis. And the crazy thing is, he never actually looked at the face of the Seekers who came to his bridge. Not once. He stared exclusively at their shadow. And this shadow manifested as the Silver Wolf, which represents our primal, raw, id-driven instinct. Now, to the Pale Inquisitor, this wolf wasn't some beautiful natural force. No way. He saw it as a deadly contagion. He looked at human instinct and desire as this chaotic noise that had to be aggressively silenced and purged. Think of the wolf as our own repressed desires, Those messy, human parts of ourselves we're usually trying to lock away.
And how exactly did he track all that chaotic noise? He used this thick, heavy substance called the ink of regret. And this is crucial. This ink is the empirical reality of human guilt. It's not just an abstract concept or an absence of light. Within the lore, it is incredibly tangible. It is literally the heavy, accumulated weight of a lifetime, a dark liquid made up of forgotten memories, buried secrets, and unspoken sins. He used this ink to meticulously record every single forbidden impulse into a massive, unyielding ledger.
The main takeaway here is that during this early stage, the Inquisitor operated as the architect of the grave. With a cold, leaden finality, his entire existence was built around one rigid ideology, which was purification through absolute subtraction. Basically, he firmly believed that holiness could only be achieved by erasing individuality entirely, just wiping out all desire and reducing the soul to a quiet, empty vacuum. It was all about subtraction, kind of like how we sometimes trick ourselves into thinking that repressing our natural instincts will somehow make us pure. But, as we'll see, absolute stasis is literally impossible to maintain.
Section 2. The Dark Apotheosis at the Shattered Gate.
Right at the threshold of the Shattered Gate, which is where the gray mist finally meets the void, the Inquisitor discovers an artifact that completely shatters his rigid world. It's an emerald cross pulsating with raw, necrotic devotion. This thing absolutely did not belong in his world of suffocating stillness. When he reached out and grabbed it with his cold hands, it started glowing with this twilight color, caught perfectly between the dying light of his rigid law and the dark of the abyss. And the moment he held it, the cross transformed into an emerald staff, triggering a massive, irreversible shift in his very nature.
This is the catalyst for what the source material calls the Dark Apotheosis. It unfolds in phases. First, his arrival at the Shattered Gate. Second, the discovery of that emerald cross. Third, as he grasps it, that twilight glow emanates and starts warping his absolute law. Fourth, and this is the real turning point, the energy of the cross allows him to actually summon and command the wolf spirit, fueled by his own obsessive need for order. And finally, by the fifth phase, we witness the dawn of the Wild Verdant. This Inquisitor, who wanted nothing more than to be a spectral judge of pure emptiness, has suddenly become a conduit for a terrifying force of explosive growth.
Section 3. The Wild Verdant and a Suffocating Web.
So we're looking at a fundamental shift in his psychology here. His old goal was purification through subtraction, right? He wanted to erase the contagion of the soul to create a clean, empty void. But his new method is entrapment through overgrowth. Instead of trying to just delete the chaotic noise of human desire, he's now weaponizing that ink of regret to ensnare it. He's actively using the heavy weight of guilt to grow a cage around the psyche.
The mechanics of this terrifying new realm are as chaotic as they are tragic.
First, he took that primal silver wolf instinct and corrupted it into the wild verdant. Second, he completely weaponized the chaotic noise of desire. Third, wherever he walked, the legendary Fisher King's wasteland didn't heal. It was violently overrun by these awful iron-thorned briars. Fourth, he literally cultivated spectral vines directly out of the ink of human guilt. And ultimately, he forced life itself into the shape of a grave. It became a living death, this explosive, chaotic growth that was still, somehow, bound by his absolute law.
Section 4. The Geometry of Guilt and Mapping the Mind.
To map out how these abstract psychological concepts actually manifest physically in the lore, we can look at these key symbolic components. Think of it as mapping the transformation from a vacuum of law right into a cage of growth. At the top, we have the iron bridge, which is associated with order and visually represented by rigid iron. That's the Inquisitor's desperate need for control. Then, the ink of regret is tied to decay, appearing as heavy darkness. That's the accumulated weight of our sins. But then, the spectral vines represent transformation, bursting forth as chaotic verdant growth. It's a really fascinating paradox. His strict, unyielding obsession with order ultimately bred an inescapable cage of chaotic verdant growth. The rigid iron and the heavy darkness combined to fuel a suffocating, twisted forest.
As the source text beautifully yet tragically puts it, it is a singular, rigid tapestry of life, trapped in a cage of living wood that never blooms. The Inquisitor actually thought he was mastering the wild instincts of the soul, but the bitter truth is that he just remained a prisoner of his own morality. The judge, the bridge, the heavy ink, those iron-thorned briars, they were all just reflections of his own rigid self-judgment. He became a whole spirit, sure, but in the absolute darkest sense imaginable. He embraced the wolf not to find freedom, but to ensure the soul was silenced by the overgrown weight of his own emerald law.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer, and to this final, haunting thought. The Inquisitor of the Overgrowth guards a throne that has been empty for an eternity. He weaponized human guilt to build a cage, only to lock himself inside. So I want to leave you with this question to ponder today. When a soul is too afraid to be free, who is the true prisoner of the overgrowth? Is it the chaotic instincts we try to bury? Or is it the rigid judge within us that refuses to let them bloom? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the architecture of guilt. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.